What is up, guys? Now today we're going to react into some true crime, and the video title is Sugar Daddy Vampire Uses Tinder to Create Sex Cult That Ended in Murder. So, an intense title, and if you guys like reaction videos like this, let me know in the comments below and come back for more, and we're going to be doing this in 2 parts. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So today's case is centered around an app that we are all probably familiar with, and that is Tinder. And today's case is not just a Tinder date gone wrong, because there is so much craziness that goes on in today's case, it's unbelievable. First of all, we have a sugar daddy vampire. This sugar daddy vampire had a witch coven cult like group where he had women and he would make them do all sorts of weird things. For example, he wouldn't allow them to wear clothes in his apartment. They had to walk around naked all day. And this sugar daddy vampire was a man named Aubrey Trail, and he has some of the most sick and twisted sexual desires.
You pretty much blatantly said that we murdered this girl. You blatantly said that we've sold her into some kind of trafficking.
But he also has an evil accomplice by the name of Bailey Boswell.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bailey, Audrey on Tinder, and a few other names.
They definitely worked together to lure women into his little coven cult thing to please his sick and twisted sexual desires. So that is what we are going to get into today. It's a very infuriating case. I get very angry at these two. They really do make my blood boil. So let's jump in. So we have 2 perpetrators today, but we are going to start with Bailey. So Bailey Boswell was born on the 26th of February 1994, making her a Pisces. And she grew up in Leon, Iowa, where she lived with her parents. And tragedy struck very early on in Bailey's life, because at just the age of 2 years old, her father was murdered. And there isn't any more public information on this, so I don't know any details around this murder, but oh my God. That is obviously an awful thing to happen to anyone, and Bailey is only 2 years old, so she's not even going to remember her dad, and her dad has been murdered. But other than that, it seems like Bailey had what would be described as a pretty normal childhood. She excelled at school athletics. She was the fastest runner on her relay team. She was an amazing basketball player. She even received a scholarship to play basketball at college. However, when she reached college age, this is when things started to go downhill for Bailey in her life, because Bailey was sexually abused in college. And we don't know any details around this. We don't know if she was sexually abused by another student, just by a stranger, like a member of the public. Was it someone like a faculty member at the college? We just don't know any details. But not only that, Bailey was made to feel like the sexual assault was her fault. She received no support whatsoever, which is a disgusting and terrible thing for any victim of sexual assault to go through. But that wasn't the only problem that Bailey started to have when she was in college, because obviously that would have been monumental for her to get through. She was also having problems with her college basketball coach. He was a bully. He would verbally abuse her. He was extremely demanding, and he would single Bailey out, and he would put Bailey down in front of her other teammates. This had a huge effect on her confidence, her self-esteem, as well as her trying to have to deal with the fact that she has been sexually assaulted. Bailey is not having it easy right now, and she does turn to drugs and alcohol to cope, and she soon became addicted. And in the grips of her addiction, Bailey unfortunately fell into a very toxic and abusive relationship with a man named Freddie. Now, Freddie, he was just a monster. There is no other way to describe him. He was actually on the college football team, so that is how they met. And at first, Bailey found him charming, attractive. He was really nice. He seemed really genuine. So they got together, became boyfriend and girlfriend. And after a few weeks of Freddie being Bailey's boyfriend, this is when everything changed. The mask slipped. He turned into a completely different person, and he was incredibly physically abusive. He would beat Bailey black and blue. He was also emotionally abusive, but not just that. He was also sexually abusive as well.
Jesus.
If Bailey did anything wrong in the relationship, he would, quote, sexually punish her, whatever that means. I don't have any more details about that. But I think it's safe to assume that he probably raped her. However, the relationship continued. Bailey felt incredibly trapped, and she ended up falling pregnant with Freddie's child, which led to the couple getting married. And after the wedding ceremony, Freddie actually went on to beat up Bailey black and blue whilst she is pregnant. This included throwing her down the stairs and kicking her in the face. Thankfully, nothing happened to the baby, and Bailey went on to have a pretty healthy pregnancy, healthy birth. However, the baby would soon be taken away from the couple because both Bailey and Freddie had problems with drugs, and instead the baby was placed in the custody of Bailey's parents. So Bailey is now approaching the age of 22, so she's still so incredibly young, and by the time she reaches 22, she has now been arrested on multiple times for various different drug offences. Her life was just going from bad to worse. Bailey's parents have said that she just became a completely different person. She wasn't that bright, happy, bubbly girl that left for college. College completely destroyed her. She was now incredibly cold and empty. However, if you think things for Bailey are bad now, well, they're about to get so much worse. And it's all down to her monster husband, Freddie. Because Freddie started sex trafficking Bailey on the internet. I know, how much worse can he get? And he did this all through a website called Backpage. Now, I had never heard of Backpage before. Backpage was essentially set up to be a competitor to Craigslist. It was the second largest classified ad website in the US, and Backpage basically became the home of illegal sex trade ads. And I'm not talking about sex workers advertising their own services by their own choice, earning a living. I'm not talking about that. I am talking predominantly forced sex trafficking, as well as child sex trafficking. And there are so many stories about victims from Backpage. I read a story where this 15-year-old teenager was sold to various men and had to have sex with them in various different hotels. There was another 15-year-old teenager who was trafficked and had their nude photos posted all over Backpage. And this same 15-year-old was then choked and gagged and forced to perform sex acts at gunpoint before then being drugged, tied up, and then gang raped by 4 men. And this was all advertised through Backpage. And honestly, I could go on. There are so many cases of victims from Backpage. And the whole reason why I'm telling you all of this is because Bailey, we're getting back to Bailey now, her husband Freddie trafficked her on Backpage. And when she is being trafficked on Backpage, Bailey is only 22 years old. She was soon being...
Wow, and this guy went to college with her, so he was around the same age as well. Jesus. God damn. That's just awful.
Sold to all of these strange men all across the US. And her husband Freddie would create the ads himself, listing all of Bailey's services, which included massages with happy endings. And Freddie would drive Bailey to all of these customers himself, and he would send her into whatever hotel or motel room, and he would wait in the car for her. Sometimes Freddie would actually burst in and rob the customer of any money or drugs they may have on them. And then Freddie would take all of the money that Bailey earned from this forced sex work. Bailey never saw $1. And this had a terrible effect on Bailey's mental health. She suffered from depression, PTSD, and eventually Bailey did find the strength to leave her husband Freddie, and she finally got herself out of this awful situation that she was in, which is obviously great. That's a huge win for her. However, now Bailey was completely on her own, which is something that she hadn't been for a while, and she was also addicted to drugs. She was incredibly vulnerable, and she also had no money. So this is now when Bailey turned to Backpage herself, and she now started to list services herself to make money. And this went on for a while. This is how Bailey was making money. Before later on in 2016, Bailey created a new ad because Bailey was looking for a sugar daddy. She wanted a sugar daddy that would fund her lifestyle. And this is when she was soon contacted by a man named Aubrey Trial, who is the main perpetrator in today's case. And Aubrey said that he could be Bailey's sugar daddy. He would take care of her. However, Bailey was now just in the clutches of the next evil monster. However, from this moment on, she starts to become a willing participant. Bailey is definitely not innocent from this moment on. So now let's talk about the main perpetrator in today's case, Aubrey Trial. He was born on the 7th of September 1966, making him a Virgo. Unlike Bailey, he did have a troubled childhood. He was abused by his parents at the age of just 2 years old before then being placed in the care of his grandparents. But that didn't last long because his mom remarried and then Aubrey was placed back in the care of his mom and his new stepdad. But then he was abused by his new stepdad. And the abuse got so bad that it ended up in Aubrey running away from home, which then led him to bounce around one foster home to the next. He also ended up in a foster home that was later closed down due to allegations of severe abuse. So we don't know if Aubrey was abused in this foster home, but it's likely. And then when he was a teenager, he started getting in trouble with the law. He would steal, he would trespass, he had problems with drugs. He was in and out of juvenile detention facilities until eventually at the age of 17, he was sent to prison for an armed robbery offense. And Aubrey would now spend most of his adult life in and out of prison. He was definitely 100% a career criminal. He was essentially a con man. He was convicted of theft, fraud, writing bad checks. And antique scams were his favorite kind of scam. He would buy in fake antiques and then sell them as genuine. And then he would also buy real antiques but write bad checks so they couldn't be cashed. And then he would sell on those real antiques, and that is how he was making most of his money. He was making a lot of money doing that. And in the end, he was actually convicted and sent to prison on 20 separate occasions. So we jump forward to 2016. Aubrey is now
20. How does it get to 20 and police don't think, right, we gotta do something about this guy? Wow. Jesus, that is too much to be him to be roaming free.
50 years old. And of course, this is when Aubrey and Bailey meet for the first time because Bailey has placed that ad on Backpage saying she wants a sugar daddy. And Bailey is obviously a lot younger than Aubrey. She's actually 28 years younger than Aubrey. And he saw her ad on Backpage, he liked what he saw, and he got in touch. And after a quote, first meeting massage, this is when Aubrey decided that he wanted to continue on seeing Bailey on a regular basis. Bailey actually had a boyfriend at the time, but Aubrey soon wrestled him out, so he no longer existed. He wanted to be the only man in Bailey's life, and at first he presented himself as this really kind and caring man. He was going to take care of Bailey, which is something that Bailey probably wanted. She wanted someone to just take care of her, given everything that she's already been through. And Bailey soon began to fall for Aubrey. They developed this very strange relationship where he was her sugar daddy. He was over twice her age, but it was also a serious romantic relationship at the same time. And Bailey actually moved in with Aubrey full-time in his apartment, which was in Wilbur, Nebraska, where the rest of today's case takes place. And it wasn't long until Bailey started assisting Aubrey on all of his scams. They now became this criminal duo. They set up their very own fake antiques company. Bailey was very involved in all of the illegal business. They went on to con loads of vulnerable people. Their favorite target were old people. And there was one poor elderly couple that Bailey and Aubrey managed to scam $400,000 from, which I'm just like, how can you target old people? Like, oh, that really, really annoys me. But there is something now that we
400,000. Wow. It's so sad when you hear those stories of old people getting scammed, man. It's so sad. Because they just don't know what's going on. And
need to address about Aubrey, and that is his sexual fantasies, because they play a very big role in today's case. Because as the relationship between Bailey and Aubrey progressed, Aubrey started imposing all of his sexual desires on Bailey, whether she liked it or not. So obviously Aubrey is Bailey's sugar daddy. That was one of his fetishes. But one of his other fetishes, Aubrey liked to believe that he was a vampire. Yep, he would tell Bailey that he was a 200-year-old vampire who could fly and read minds. Aubrey also had a fetish for drinking blood. hence the vampire. And I don't know if Aubrey actually believed that he was a vampire, or was he just saying this to like manipulate Bailey in some kind of way? Was he trying to convince Bailey that he was a vampire? Was he trying to convince himself that he was? And then he started reading all of these books on witchcraft, and then this also became a huge fantasy of his. He became sexually aroused by witches. So this then led Aubrey christening Bailey as head witch of his new coven that he was forming. And Aubrey was obviously the head vampire, the only vampire of this coven. So Bailey is currently the only member of his coven. It doesn't really make any sense, does it? But just go with it. So Bailey is the only member of his coven. But of course, this was not enough for Aubrey. He wanted many witches in his coven. He thought that it was his God-given right to have sex with as many witches as he wanted. So what did Aubrey decide to do? He decided that he wanted to create his very own witch coven sex cult, which are 4 words that I never thought would leave my mouth. So yes, Aubrey now has a witch coven sex cult, and he is the head vampire. Aubrey wanted to create this cult of women that would follow him and do whatever he wanted, like all of his sexual desires. And some of the things that he made these women do are just so degrading, so disgusting, especially because he liked to target vulnerable women. They weren't really there by choice. They were there because they felt like they were trapped. They had no other option. So one thing that Aubrey demanded of the women in his coven cult was that they called him daddy at all times. They also had to check in with him every hour of every day. They were not allowed to have any interaction with any other men apart from him, and they also had to perform sex acts on him whenever he demanded. He also christened himself as the sugar daddy vampire because he was there to take care of all of the witches in his coven, and that is what he wanted Bailey to call him from now on. Sugar daddy vampire. So where did Aubrey go to find
What? Oh my, yeah, this, nah. Yeah, okay. Wow.
the women that he wanted to join his coven? Well, he turned to Tinder. I'm surprised he didn't turn to Backpage, if I'm being completely honest. Maybe he did, but as far as I'm aware, he just turned to Tinder. So Aubrey created a Tinder profile. He created a fake profile using Bailey as the profile picture, but he used a fake name. He would use loads of different names, such as Jenna or Kelsey, just various different names. And he was basically pretending to be Bailey on Tinder, just under a fake name, and he was trying to find women who matched with Bailey. And as soon as a woman got matched with Bailey on Tinder, he would try and lure them into his witch coven sex cult, pretending to be Bailey. Does that make sense? So the first woman that we know of that fell victim to Bailey and Aubrey, we only know by their initials, which are AH. So for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to call them Alice so it doesn't get too confusing. And pretty much all of the women in the cult, we only know their initials. Their identities have been kept somewhat private, so I have just given them names for this video. So Alice was 22 years old. She was incredibly young, like Bailey. She was currently unemployed and she was struggling to pay rent, her car payments. She had big dreams of going to nursing school, and she definitely didn't have an easy childhood, an easy past. She had had problems with her stepfather, whatever that might mean. That could mean a whole host of different things. And she first matched with Bailey on Tinder in 2017. And the pair went on a date, Bailey and Alice. But who else was there? Well, of course, Aubrey was there. Even though Alice didn't realise this, she thought that she was just going on a date with Bailey. And pretty much from the get-go, Aubrey started brainwashing Alice. Aubrey started telling Alice about his and Bailey's relationship, how he was Bailey's sugar daddy, how he could also be Alice's sugar daddy, how he could pay for everything. And obviously, Alice is really struggling for money right now. He said that he would pay her a weekly allowance. He would pay her rent, all of her car payments. He also said that he would put her through nursing school. Aubrey also said that he would help with her stepfather, whatever that might mean. But I don't know about any of you, but I'm just assuming that Aubrey is maybe insinuating like physical violence or something like that. All Alice would need to do in return was join the witch coven sex cult. And Aubrey started showing Alice photos of nude women, 12 nude women. And he said, all of these women, they're already in my witch coven. I treat them so well. This could be you. And obviously this was all a lie. Nobody was in this coven apart from Bailey. I don't know why he thought showing naked photos of women, like, did he think that that was going to seal the deal? Like, did he think that Alice was like, yeah, okay, let's go. But whatever. It was probably the money, if I'm being completely honest, because Alice needs money. Alice agreed to join the coven. And from the get-go, Alice had to start following all of these ridiculous rules and these requirements. She first moved into Aubrey and Bailey's apartment. She had to call Aubrey daddy the whole time, but she also had to call Bailey mommy. She also had to get permission to do anything. And I mean anything. She had to ask to go to the bathroom. She had to ask to get a drink of water. She was also forbidden from having contact with any other men. She was barely even allowed to leave the apartment. And if she did leave the apartment, she had to check back in after 3 hours. So she basically couldn't hold down a job, which is exactly what Aubrey wants. He wants these women to be financially dependent on him. And there was one more thing that Aubrey required of his witches in his little coven. And that is that they had to be naked at all times when they were in the apartment. They were not allowed to wear a single item of clothing. And that was so Aubrey could demand sex whenever he wanted. So the women, so this is obviously just Alice and Bailey right now, they had to do everything naked. They had to prepare dinner naked because obviously they're doing all of the chores, all of the cooking and everything. And Aubrey would just sit there, be waited on hand and foot by these naked women because this was his sexual fantasy. They had to watch TV on the evening together naked. And obviously, given that it is a witch coven sex cult, it did turn sexual very, very quickly. It was basically demanded that Alice partake in threesomes, whether she wanted to or not. And these threesomes, they usually involved erotic asphyxiation. And during these sex sessions, Aubrey started telling Alice that he was a 200-year-old vampire, that he could read minds, that he could fly, just all of the crap that he told Bailey. And Alice, from what I have read, she believed all of this in the beginning. Aubrey would tell Alice that she was his witch and he could have sex with her whenever he wanted because he was the head daddy vampire and she was just a witch in his coven. And he could have sex with her at any point, at any time, and do whatever he wanted with her. Now, after about a month of this incredibly weird and messed up setup, Aubrey decided that he wanted another woman to join the witch coven. So this is when Bailey goes to Tinder and starts to try and find another woman to join the coven sex cult thing. So Bailey matches with another woman on Tinder. They actually go and meet this woman in a grocery store, but this woman took one look at Aubrey and got out of there. She was like, hell no. He looks like a creep. And I don't blame her.
Yeah, and that's why they go for desperate people, because only desperate people would even look past his, like, he just looks weird. I don't like to judge people like that based off looks, but maybe it's because I know what's going to happen, but the guy looks weird. But this is why they go for vulnerable people, because they know if you're vulnerable, you're most likely to do more stuff. If you are vulnerable, most people will. Wow, he's like a vulture, you know, just circling for his next prey, isn't he? You know, yeah, disgusting, man.
However, unfortunately, they did find another woman on Tinder. Another woman got matched with Bailey, who was obviously using a fake name, and this woman again.
Yeah, and that's why they have Bailey there, to make the women feel comfortable, obviously. I've seen it before, so many cases like this, where they'll have the woman and the man, you know. There's been so many, I'm trying to think, I can't think on the top of my head, but there's so many true crime cases I've watched, where you have the woman and the man, you know. I guess Jeffrey Epstein's like the biggest one I can think of, right? I know there was no crime in terms of killing, but yeah.
We only know her initials, which are AG. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call her Amelia. And Amelia was just 18 years old. She was fresh out of high school. She currently didn't have a job. Her family had emigrated from Russia just 5 years prior. She was what has been described as a rebellious teenager. her, and she was currently looking for a way to make more money and also just to have new experiences. And unfortunately, she came across Bailey's profile on Tinder. So Bailey and Amelia went on a date, but obviously Aubrey was also there. And again, it was the exact same situation as it was with Alice. Aubrey started selling his witch coven sex cult to Amelia, saying how good he was, how kind and caring, and he took care of all of the witches in his coven. He would be her sugar daddy. He would pay for everything. All she had to do was join the coven, which was so much fun. And sadly, Amelia now becomes another member of this coven cult. So now there is 4 in this sex witch coven cult thing, and Aubrey was paying for all of these women. He was giving them weekly allowances. He was taking them for trips to the mall. He would pay for them to go to the hair salon. He would take them out for dinner, and he was loving life, having these 3 younger women on his arm. And there was only one thing that these women had to do in return, and that was follow all of the rules, but also have sex with him whenever he wanted. And this is when the sex really does go into overdrive right now. There really is just sex happening all the time. Sex, sex, and more sex. Most of the time now, it was actually Aubrey making the other 3 women have sex with each other, and he would just sit and watch before it then descended into like one big orgy. And obviously, Amelia had to follow the same rules as Alice and Bailey. She had to call Bailey mommy. She had to call Aubrey daddy. She had to be naked at all times. She wasn't allowed to leave the house. She had to check in if she did. And it's just very cult-like, isn't it? And obviously, Aubrey is pretending to be this 200-year-old vampire. And to continue on this ruse, he would many times pretend to hypnotize Bailey. And obviously, Bailey was in on this, so Bailey played along. And she pretended to be under this spell to convince the other women that he was this powerful vampire. But if you think all of this so far is bad enough, it only gets worse, because of course it bloody does. Because Aubrey had another fantasy that he would now start talking to all of his witches about over and over again. And what was this fantasy? Well, of course it was murder. And not just murder, it was torturing and murder, but in particular murder. Aubrey started talking about murdering women all of the time. This became his new favourite topic of conversation. And in particular, he liked to talk about murdering women when they were all having sex. He started telling his witches that he wanted to create a video murdering a woman and sell it. He actually said that he was going to be able to make $1 million worth of profit from creating a snuff film, and then they could split the profit 4 ways and then all go their separate ways. Like it was one big payday. He was literally trying to convince the 3 witches in his coven, Bailey, Alice, and Amelia, that it was a good idea to murder a woman because they would make a lot of money. And he started filling all of their heads with so much nonsense that he had killed many women before. It was all part of the fact that he was a 200-year-old vampire. And obviously this is a lie. He also tried to make all of these murders linked to witchcraft, because that was obviously a big part of this coven. And he tried to say that the witches in his coven, for them to become true witches, they needed to breathe in the last breath of somebody, whatever that means, but he's basically insinuating that they need to kill someone to become a true witch. And he reassured his witches. He said, don't worry, we will only target bad people, like pedophiles or murderers. And it's like, pot kettle black, you are claiming to be a murderer. He even started to put together his own little killing bag, which consisted of a hammer and pliers. He would cheerfully talk to his witches about how he had such a fantasy about pulling somebody's nails from their fingers and also cutting off their eyelids. So now Aubrey and his 3 witches, they would go to Walmart, just various other stores, trying to find a victim. And Aubrey would point out various women that he would see, and he would say, what do you think? What about that one? Do you think that is a good potential victim? There was even one woman that came up to talk to Aubrey at Walmart, I think it was, and Aubrey almost took her as his first potential victim. But thankfully she walked off and nothing happened. But it's just so scary to think about that Aubrey is literally there in Walmart basically window shopping for potential victims that he wants to murder. And unbelievably, one of the witches, Alice, has actually said that she was really into this plan, this whole murder plan. She had been brainwashed so thoroughly by Aubrey, she was actually excited about the prospect of murdering somebody and becoming a powerful witch. However, Amelia was completely different, and this whole murder plan was the last straw for her. She already wanted out of this coven cult, but now she really did want to get out, and she knew she had to get out. And Amelia actually went to Aubrey and said, "This is wrong. You can't murder someone. This is just going too far." And what was Aubrey's response to this? Well, he tried to talk Alice, who was the one excited about murder, he tried to talk Alice into murdering Amelia. Yes, he is now turned on one of his witches and he's like, okay, you don't believe in this? You don't think you want to murder somebody because it's too far? I'm going to now murder you. Amelia was about to become the group's first murder victim for them to all murder and become powerful witches. But in the end, thankfully, Alice refused to go along with this. And I think this kind of knocked some sense into Alice because she was thinking that she was going to murder a stranger. Not that that makes it okay, but I think the fact that Aubrey wanted to try and make her murder Amelia, who was her fellow coven member, her fellow witch, her friend. This knocked some sense into Alice, and Alice was like, yeah, no, I can't do this. I want to get out. So thankfully, Alice and Amelia, they now leave the coven. But Aubrey said to both of them, if they ever spoke a word about any of this to anyone, Aubrey would track down every single member of their family and murder them all. So after they left the coven cult, Alice and Amelia, they never said a word to anybody about any of this. And obviously Bailey is still in the coven because she's mommy and she's complicit. Like, she wants to murder somebody as well. But do things end there? No, of course they don't. Because only a few days later, Aubrey is back on Tinder trying to lure another woman to join his coven. And he found one. And this woman we only know by her initials as well, and her initials are KB. So for the purposes of this video, I am going to call her Kelly. And Kelly is only 21 years old. She was very young, very impressionable. And Kelly matched with Bailey, and obviously Bailey still is going by a fake name on Tinder. So Kelly and Bailey match on Tinder. They go out on their first date and it is just the two of them. Aubrey wasn't there on this date. And Bailey started talking to Kelly about her sexual preferences and her desires. And Bailey asked Kelly if she would be interested in a submissive, dominant relationship. And Kelly, who was still exploring what she liked, her sexuality, she said yes. However, Bailey said that there would be strings attached because there was a 50-year-old man who would be both of their sugar daddies. And Kelly was unsure about this. She wasn't interested in men. She only wanted a relationship with a woman. I mean, she only wanted to be with Bailey. But she thought, what's the harm in trying something new? And she went along with it. And over the next 2 weeks, Kelly's life turned into a roller coaster. Because obviously now Kelly has joined this coven cult, whether she knows it or not. And obviously she had all of those rules imposed on her. She had to remain naked at all times. The only thing that she was allowed to wear was a pink collar that Bailey had bought her. Next came the sex. At first, it was just Bailey and Kelly, but then Aubrey started to get involved. Bailey ordered Kelly to perform oral sex on Aubrey as part of being a submissive. There was also talk about vampires and witchcraft. Aubrey told Kelly that he had a large coven of witches that she would one day meet. But then this is when things got really weird again, because during sex, and I mean literally in the middle of sex, Bailey would talk to Kelly about murdering and torturing women. So it was Bailey now talking about murder and torturing. In the middle of sex, literally Bailey started asking Kelly, would you ever torture somebody for me? Would you ever murder somebody for me? And Kelly played along. She thought, okay, maybe this is just like some sort of role play. Maybe this is what Bailey is into. So Kelly played along and she started saying all of these torture techniques that she learned in high school from like the 15th century. So now 1 week into the relationship, because it has progressed very, very quickly, things got even crazier because now Bailey tells Kelly that she has a stalker and that she wants Kelly to murder her stalker. And who was this stalker that Bailey had? Well, it was the previous coven cult member Amelia.
Oh,
they
wow.
still want to murder Amelia because she didn't agree with murder. Both Aubrey and Bailey want Amelia murdered, but they don't want to do it themselves. So they first tried to get Alice to do it. Alice obviously refused, and now they want to get Kelly to do it under the story that Amelia is this crazy stalker. But of course, like any sane person, Kelly said no. However, because she refused, in response to this, She was then sexually tortured. Aubrey started carrying out all of these brutal sexual punishments, which included penetrating her anally with a sex toy. And then just 2 weeks after going on that first date with Bailey, Kelly fakes an asthma attack, manages to flee the apartment, and she goes home. But unfortunately, this is not the last that we hear of Kelly. She does come back up in this case. And things from this point move incredibly quickly because now that Kelly has fled, Aubrey and Bailey are now moving on to their next victim. And this is now where we need to talk about a young woman called Sydney Loof. Now, Sydney was currently 24 years old. She was born in 1993 and she was currently living in a small town in Nebraska. And as a child, Sydney was described as just a child that was full of life and energy. She loved playing on tree swings. She loved going on bike rides with her brother, sledding with her little sister. She performed extremely well at sports in school. She was on the basketball team, the athletics team. She even played golf. However, sadly, in Sydney's teenage years, this is when her life completely changed because she developed scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine. And this meant that she pretty much couldn't participate in sports anymore. Even just swinging a golf club caused her immense pain. However, Sydney, she didn't let this bring her down. She had other hobbies that she dived into. She was a huge animal lover. And after finishing school, she got an apartment in Lincoln, Nebraska, where she adopted a kitten who she absolutely adored. And she found herself a job at a local hardware store. And
Hey, fair play to her, because if you guys have ever had sports injuries, they're just the worst. They're literally just the worst. Like, I've had it before, and you just have to stop playing your sport, the sport you love. It's really sad, man, because it's like you put everything into that sport. Damn.
And Sydney gained a reputation as just being the most kind, considerate, caring person you could ever meet in your entire life. She loved helping people. That was her main passion in life. She even gave some of the employees that she worked for, when they didn't have a place to stay, she let them into her apartment and gave them a place to live whilst they got back on their feet. She went out of her way to help people. However, Sydney had some problems of her own. She didn't have it easy. She struggled with her mental health. She struggled with depression, anxiety. She would talk to her parents a lot about her struggles, and her parents really helped her. But overall, Sydney's life was great. She had an amazing group of friends. She was just always someone that wanted to have a good time. But that was until she came across the evil duo of today's case.
Now look, guys, I'm gonna stop there. Like I said, I was doing 2 parts, so if you guys do enjoy this first reaction video, let me know. I know I wasn't talking too much, but I wanted to let the video play. Plus, it's a very interesting case. But again, guys, if you do want a part 2 to this, if you want me to react to part 2, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'm out. Peace.